policy framework that can support the development of an ecosystem around, in this case, around space within the country. This framework there needs to be an introspection within the nation to understand what are the area of strengths, what are the opportunities area to develop, what are the aspirations, what are the objectives. And often we need to look at this not just within the space sector, but also looking at other economic areas of importance within the country. I'm thinking I come from the geospatial area, and most of the beneficiaries of this technology come from other industries. So it is important to involve them in the development of these kind of policies. And finally, another important part is the ability to rationalize and articulate these frameworks within a national space policy, a national space strategy. I would also argue a geospatial space strategy, considering the importance of data in today's economy. And this is important not just because we know what we need to achieve, but it is almost a marketing tool. We need to publicize. Sometimes national space strategies goes in the drawer and are not used. They need to be used to engage with international partners so that they understand where we come from, they understand where we want to go, and we can achieve a level playing field in the conversation, which makes everything more transparent and easily to develop.
Thank you. Just to add to what Luca has said, I think it's very important for developing countries to look at alternative sources of financing, apart from the traditional forms of financing. As we know, even currently as we speak, I'm sure everyone in the room is aware that Kenya is discussing its budget for the next fiscal year. And there's a lot of constraint on resources for many developing countries because the priorities may not necessarily be space. So looking into alternative ways of raising resources is something that developing countries should really place focus on. By alternative forms of raising resources, this includes the private sector itself. As we all know in the room, the global governance framework for the space industry necessarily places the responsibility, jurisdiction, and control on the level of the state. So the state cannot escape from actually developing the space sector. The primary players are actually the state parties within the space economy, then transcending down to the private sector and other entities. So I think that apart from that, also developing nations need to come together and identify common interests, areas of interest. So for example, in Africa, we could identify what, and I think a lot of work has gone into that already through the African Space Policy and Strategy. And from there, we'll be able then to narrow down on what kind of resources we need to raise and where we need to place our focus.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think resources is a major issue for developing countries, including Kenya. And we must find other ways, as we said, to ensure we get resources. Without repeating what my colleagues have already said, I just want to mention one area that we could, as developing countries in Africa, be able to pool resources together. For example, the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. It's a regional body owned by 20 African countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. And the ideals that started in the 60s, Pan-Africanism, is for institutions, because of lack of resources, to come together under one center to pool resources, not only financial, but also human expertise, so that those pool resources can be of benefit to the countries, the different countries. And I think we need to continue in that direction. It's been mentioned already, there is the Africa policy on space, and there is the Africa Space Center in Egypt. If we could continue in that, path of pooling resources together as African countries, developing countries, then we'll be able to bridge that gap, because space and space technology is resource intensive. It's not only for Africa, by the way, also in Europe, they have the European Space Agency, 22 countries coming together to be able to develop, together the space sector. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have two ways to answer that question. The first is that is keeping yourself open for good partnerships and collaborations. And in some instances, no deal is better than a bad deal. And I think that there are many instances where partnerships have been established that unfairly, advantage one group over the other. And I think it's really important to be clear about building solutions that work effectively and are value-adding for all the parties involved, equally in some way. So I think that being deliberate about this is really, really important. The second is a little bit of a different take on your question, which is there can be a real advantage in being resource constrained. And we shouldn't underestimate the power of having to operate with limited budgets. I'm going to take the example of the Indian South Pole landing. That was a fraction of the cost of what a NASA or an ESA would charge, or not charge, but like a cost, to put something on the moon. I can't remember what the number, I think the number was like $170 million on the order of that, compared with something like SLS, which is running into the billions of dollars. So resource constraints are a real issue, absolutely. But knowing that you operate within these constraints is kind of where engineers work best, right? The tighter your design constraints, the more creative you have to be around solving some of these problems. And I think that is equally true in the finance environment, where you're not operating with, infinite budget extensions and all these kinds of questions, forces you to be really careful around what you're doing. So just building on what everyone else has said, I think that this is a different way of saying actually maybe being resource constrained may not always be a bad idea.
Okay, I will construct my contribution into levels. I agree with all of you that investing is a problem, finding a fund is a problem. But I think developed countries can help a lot in this way. And African countries through the National Space Agency could get benefit from these opportunities. The same level, the space agencies should put right policy and regulators and define the priority and allocate funds in order to maintain and participate in different projects. From the other hand, as a practice, we can take an example, the agreement between Italy and Kenya for Luigi Broglio Space Center is a good example where Italy investing money together with Kenya Space Agency with the direct benefit to the Kenya Space Agency. Supporting also Kenya Space Agency in different international framework that can be able also to access different funds also.
Okay, thank you. Let me start with saying that, this collaboration partnership, see, this is not just only essential for developing countries, but also essential for even developed countries, because it is, the world is moving fast and rapidly technology being changed, and talent is everywhere, and only way to kind of get to make the progress is only with the collaboration partnership. So I think to bring in this kind of collaboration partnerships more realistic, I think nations, every nation needs the strong policies to define what level of collaboration and partnership can be enabled so that the progress can be made. I think just to share the recent progress from India. So Indian government has brought in the new space policy where they kind of brought in this, they changed the policy to invite 100% of investments into the space manufacturing. That kind of enabled at least companies like me, enabled at least 20 to 30 companies where we brought in $100+ million of investments. That actually helps us making the progress. And just to call out an example, in the recent past, I was talking to a few of my friends from JPL, where somebody mentioned that for the deep space exploration program, internally in US, somebody estimated about $450 million building one satellite for the asteroid mining. But the question is, how can we bring it down the cost? The only way to bring down the cost, open up for the collaboration and partnership.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your responses. I think we seem to be converging somewhere in terms of the ideas we have. So my next question goes to John, and I think from what we have read in her bio, and I believe what she has experienced, there's a lot between the developing and the developed countries. We feel that there needs to be some partnerships developed. There are some who have already invented the wheel. Maybe we don't want to do that. So what do you think needs to be done to ensure that these partnerships and collaborations are in a way balanced and can create equitable benefits for all those that are involved? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is usually a very dicey question. Because there are very many ways to look at it. For instance, we've had a partnership with Italy since 1960. Yeah? And we've had progress, but we could be farther. With a lot of respect, we could be farther. Now, there are many elements that go into a partnership. If you go into a partnership, you need to be able to speak the same language. And I think Davis really pointed out that you need a convergence. And, on a personal level, I'm very grateful that we got into a collaboration with Italy when we did. They came before we got independence, so we got our independence in 1963. And I think Italy's presence in Kenya actually spurred the space industry, the beginnings of the space industry in Kenya. But for the Kenyan part, we need to also have done the work, and we are doing the work. We have our Kenya Space Agency, as we can see, that's why we're here today. But we really need to build capacity. We need to be able to speak the same language so that we're able to benefit in a way that's mutually agreeable and beneficial for both states. And I think that, I know that, maybe somebody would ask, do we have any frameworks that we can enter into? I think there are already enough frameworks and laws and bilateral agreements, yeah? it's really about identifying what your interests are, what your strengths are, and then what do you bring to the table, and then getting to the table and being able to negotiate for what would benefit you on both sides. And I think that's possible. We've done that. It's been a long journey with Italy. I'm a state council, so I have seen all iterations of our bilateral agreement since from over 10 years ago when I joined government. So I have to say also that there's a lot of work in terms of time, and as Davis put it, building trust and actually being really clearly honest on the table that this is what we want to achieve on this side of the table, and your partner also being very open. So I know Anastasia had said that maybe I should talk about the laws, and I said, no, I think there are enough laws. We already have the Outer Space Treaty 1967, which, as I said already in my previous comments, the primary parties to it are state parties. So it is a state responsibility to actually build frameworks for collaboration. And within the treaty itself, there are points that actually point towards state parties developing the space sector in collaboration globally. Yeah? So I think that's about it for me on that. As I said, countries have different interests, but find where your interests converge and then get to the table and be honest with each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. I think my next question, we want to look at the issue of knowledge transfer, capacity building, and also sustain long-term benefits for developing countries. So, yes, I want to start with Luca to tell us what he thinks are the key elements that we should present in, to ensure effective collaborations and partnerships in that area.
Oh, okay. Now, I come from the innovation sector, so do not have much experience on drafting collaborations agreement between countries, between space agencies and institutions. The job I do on a daily basis is to support entrepreneurs, to support innovators in geospatial to connect with markets. And on this respect, I think one thing that is often that I think would boost effective space collaboration agreement would be an opportunity for the international partner that might be more developed to support the partner that is on a developing countries to create an entrepreneurial ecosystems. We tend to, in the space industry, we tend to talk a lot about technology, and we do love technology and satellites and rockets, and those are very important. These are the base of our industry. But what we really need to build are companies. We need to build space companies. We need to create space business leaders. It is okay to build the technology, but we should not talk too much about it. We should rather start talking about how we can develop product market fits, how we can support inward investment, how we can create value proposition, particularly in the geospatial sector, means that you take a technology and you understand what is the customer problem and you deliver a product that fit with those needs. And in the view of developing international agreements, I think the one element that should be part of it is supporting creating this kind of network, this kind of ecosystem, which will go a long way to support the growth of the sector within the developing countries.
Thank you. And I think I want to pose something similar to Rupesh. I think he has been in an area also that has done a lot of innovations, creating new technologies. And maybe you can tell us more about what are those things that we can put in place to ensure that we get better collaborations, better partnerships, so that we improve the capacities of those who seem to be lagging behind.
Yeah. I think aligning the national policies, to the international space policies, where the collaboration will start from like, what is that we are trying to go after, right? Basically, so as we see this whole space policy would kind of like bring in this collaboration opportunities from the government to government level, and then the business to business, agency to agencies, all the way to technology. As Lucas mentioned, like, I think technology is like, a part of the overall, objectives and the problem statement and the solution part. And these policies would actually like, bring in identifying the strengths of all the partners being part of the collaboration, and kind of like, play to the strengths. And recent example is the Artemis program, where like, India has opened up for the participating as astronauts by the NASA. Without that kind of policies and like programs initiative, there's no level of collaboration where like, countries can participate in this kind of like, high cost, long-term missions.
Okay, thank you so much. I think I want to move to further down. We are looking at partnerships, collaborations, without necessarily specifying for what. So if we delve down further to sector-specific partnerships and collaborations, I think we've been looking at specific sectors in this conference, and their partnerships and collaborations that can actually enhance collaborations within sectors. But how do we strengthen those partnerships and collaborations for maximum impact? Professor Farah, maybe please take a shot at that.
Thank you. I think for the young ones, we've been talking of partnerships. Probably we need to tell them what is partnership. And partnership is cooperation between two organizations, two countries, or two businesses to work together for the mutual benefit of the two organizations. So that is important. So to go to specific in the applications, or as has been mentioned, downstream or upstream part of this, the sector, space sector, for impact, one of the things that is usually ignored or not taken care of is not only the training of the staff or human resource, but it's also important to do the institutional capability development. And this is where we are weakening. If you really want to have a sustainable use of, for example, Earth observation in agriculture, food security, and disaster management, because this should be a long-term, and the institutions in the developing countries should be able to institutionalize, these technologies, or domesticate, or so that they can use it in their daily operations. So I think the problem of having impact, because we don't see a lot of course, there is some impact, but not as would have expected, is not the technical or technology, but is the institutional framework. The institution should be able to have policies, strategic plans, so that the infrastructure required to absorb that technology and the framework that can absorb these technologies is in place. So I would, I'm sure other colleagues will add, that's a critical thing that we need to do in the developing countries, to increase the capacity of the institutions and have clear functions and mandates, so that when these partnerships or collaborations finish, the institution can continue doing the applications. For example, in disaster management, that the institution will have a clear framework or mandate to do that. So that if there's a disaster like flooding, we know in Kenya which institution will expected to bring the data that is required to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response. I think the next question I'll pose to Dave is, and it's also about the sector-specific collaborations. Do we have like bare minimums in terms of the kind of agreements that we'll sign when coming into, formal collaborations, formal partnerships? And how do we go about that?
I think this comes back to one of the comments earlier about you need to start small, right? So I think it's very difficult to establish any partnership at a large scale as your first interaction. There's just too much risk involved, there's too much complexity of the relationships, and there's too many resources that need to apply to that for people who don't, know each other. So I think for me, the way that these progress is small programs, and then they get added to. So there are extensions on what is being done. And so partnerships become more complex over time as they bring on new areas of value or new opportunities that they see through that process. So I think for me it is very much a growth. And, I think that particularly when you look at the partnerships at different countries, these things last for many, many years, and there are many different, I guess, cultures and attitudes over time. So the relationship and agreements between Italy and Kenya in 1960, 1960 was a very different world to 2024. But what is important is that the strength of that relationship and the value that's obviously been provided has continued over the last 65 years, right? And so I'm sure that also the level of complexity of that relationship has increased over time, which speaks to the strength and the value of that. If I think of some of the work that, we've certainly done through partnership with FCDO, groups like KTN, where Luca is, or the Riser Fund, these things have been going on for a shorter period of time, but they're much more complex and extensive today than where they were 5 years ago. And that happens when people realize they like working together, there's value on both sides, and you're like, okay, well, how do we add to this? How do we add to this more? So small steps build trust, and that's where it'll blossom into a true relationship.
Thank you very much. Last question, but not least, and we'll ask to Dr. Muzel. I think Kenya has had a relationship with Italy for some time now. And when we talk about these partnerships, sometimes we sign so many agreements. We celebrate in a big launch. But how do we make them thrive and grow so that they're not just there and we say, we signed this 10 years ago, but we need to show something for it. I think that goes back to impact, but based on the relationship that we have had, what do you think needs to be improved in order to make sure that these partnerships and collaboration thrive and bring actual benefits to both parties?
Okay. I think the key element of every bilateral agreement is transparency, inclusive, and sharing, implementing decision, everything together. So through our partner, Kenya Space Agency, as an implementing agency for the intergovernmental agreement, we have a very good activity together. We received from Kenya Space Agency the key priorities for Kenya. And together, we are implementing step by step in different space science. We are concentrating now on infrastructure and capacity buildings, directly from Italy and also at international level. We already did in the past. This year we are doing 3 capacity courses, and we are programming next year. We have also an structure that will help Kenyan to build their own capacity and to be independent. Okay? We have a different ground station, and we have already 200 local workers, Kenyan, working with us. Italians, they don't work there, only Kenyan. So with the Kenya Space Agency, we are going in the right way, as the CS said in the beginning. So just as a demonstration, the 15 scholarship fully paid in Earth observation dedicated to only Kenyan, and this will be repeated annually as foreseen in the intergovernmental agreement.
Thank you very much. I think there's so much that we want to talk about, but I think I don't want to stand between you and lunch. So we'll just pick 2 questions from the audience. Okay, the first 2 hands to go up. One. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Please. And be very specific, please, 30 seconds. Don't give a background, just go straight to the question.
Hello, my name is Michael, I represent the French government. My question is to John. Now, as we know about innovation, is that innovation starts and then regulation kind of plays catch up. Now, the question, I know where I'm going, is there regulation or progress in place to make sure that the sector, geospatial data and whatnot, is well regulated well beforehand so that we don't play catch up again? And of course, you mentioned the State Treaty 1967. Is that a framework that can be used internationally? Is there an international standard being developed? Does it exist? So kind of one question that you can answer in 3 parts.
Thank you. The next person.
Mine is a compliment to Dr. Munza. In his presentation, he gave about the collaboration that Italian Space Agency is having with Kenya, and I'm a beneficiary. I'm a beneficiary of the Copernicus Working Group for last year and this year, and I think next week I'll be doing a training that is supported and actually funded by the Copernicus African Working Group. Thank you.
Thank you. So another question there.
Thank you, Kanamoho. Mine is on this collaboration partnership. We've been talking about Earth observation, landmass. I think that's what I've seen a lot. I've not seen about the water mass observation. These collaborations, how can these collaborations assist in harnessing the blue economy, especially in Kenya, along our defined maritime boundaries, because that's where we have a lot of resources, which I think they have also been mapped by the Regional Center for Mapping. We have a lot of resources. How can this partnership assist the country? Thank you.
Are you posing to a specific person or anyone can respond?
Well, okay, to the ear, because of the Malindi Space Center, Leo Brogro, maybe to Prof. and Madam Chesoni. Thank you.
So, okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, let me speak about the Regional Center for Earth Observation in Malindi. The Regional Center is almost ready. At the end of the year, would be completed with a complete data exploitation infrastructure. So you will be able, as Kenya, to receive directly the available data from our antenna operative. You will receive a complete cover for Kenya from the Italian constellation, Cosmos Skymen and Hyperspectral Prisma. You will be able to develop your own product, and also it will be available also a platform, a marketplace for different kind of application, urban, flood, land cover, land use, crop estimation. All these products, services, added value product has been already agreed with Kenya Space Agency. So the system is there and is also accessible from Kenya Space Agency in Nairobi. It will be, we will have a Nairobi node that permits the technician to access what we have in Malindi. So it's up to you, okay? This system, it will be accompanied also with different capacity training courses. This year we will have one. Next year, when we deliver the system, we will have an extensive capacity system from the beginning, from the remote sensing, from radar, Earth observation, application, software application.
Okay, thank you. John?
Okay, so I'll go to the question that was asked, directed to me. So on the first part, I'll answer in relation to the Outer Space Treaty 1967. This is an international treaty, and once a country signs up to a treaty, becomes a member state. So Kenya is a state party of the of the Outer Space Treaty, 1967. There's some requirements, can we say minimum requirements in regard to management of space-related activities within a state party. And I want to touch on responsibility and liability and jurisdiction and control. So in the Outer Space Treaty, it states that responsibility for space activities lies with a state party, even if those activities are carried out by a non-governmental organization within that state party. Connected to that are issues of liability. So in event liability arises out of a space activity, this draws back to the state party. In terms of jurisdiction and control, even though the space asset may be owned by a private sector player or non-governmental individual, in terms of licensing, operation, supervision, that ties back into the state. Now, how does that then appear? How is then that enforced? It's actually enforced through national laws. So the finer details of that are actually contained in our national laws. And I think you are aware of the Kenya Space Bill, now 2024. We had started work on it last year, but now it's 2024, and I hope you gave your feedback. I hope you've examined it and looked at it. In relation to your second question, if I understood, it is true, we always say that the law is playing catch-up, especially when it comes to the field of innovation technology, because lawyers take some time to actually, we like to craft a law after we've understood the direction which the industry is headed. It's not always very convenient, but I think there is really also some bare minimums on an international level that we can fall back to. So to answer your question on data management, again, I'll refer you to the Kenya Space Bill. We have some elements within that would cater for that, but we also have an extensive intellectual property law framework that exists in Kenya. And I would encourage you to actually look at that set of laws. They're available on kenyalaw.org. We also have laws around data protection. And so we just don't look at one piece of legislation when you're looking at a governing framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we are at the tail end of this panel discussion. I think we'd have loved to have more time. We are looking at partnerships between countries. We also know that we have partnerships within institutions, within a country. And I think that has been happening a lot, and we know what we find, that we do find benefits there. So I'll just call for a parting shot, 30 seconds please, from each one of you. Just tell us what you think would be either the immediate or medium-term or a long-term action that would enable us to create better partnerships and collaborations. And if you have a saying from your country that goes with that, I think one of the things I would want to stress here is that the reason why we have partnerships and collaborations is because nobody can do some of these things by themselves. From what we have seen in the last 3 days, there's always a bit of collaboration. We are always better when you are in a team than when you are alone. So kindly, we'll start with you and come this way.
Well, I thoroughly enjoy being here at the Kenyan Space Expo and Conference, and one action that I would like to see happening at the next conference is to see more non-space private sector player talking at the stage. We need to understand those challenges, their challenges, so that we can have meaningful conversation on how the space sector can resolve business and global challenges.
Thank you. I think for me, it's back to what I'd alluded to, which is I don't think you can really have effective communication or collaboration unless you're speaking the same language. And for space, as a person from the arts, I'm not a STEM person, I'm a lawyer, I think it's very important for us to build capacity all around. Space is an interdisciplinary field, and I think that for me, it's all about capacity, knowledge, and access to that knowledge. And my saying is, haba na haba ujaza kibaba. So little by little, we get there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I want to emphasize again, good partnerships starts with us, the developing countries, to have institutions that have a clear vision, clear strategic plans, so that when we engage partners, we clearly know what we want, and put whatever we have on the table, and have those partnerships help us achieve our objectives, our vision, and our strategies. Thank you.
I think for me it would be around learning from and working with the examples that have been successful to date. There are people who have already walked this path. Another program we are involved with is Digital Earth Africa. It is a fantastic program. Learn from them, right? See how you can replicate and build on top of those programs and not start everything from the beginning. And my saying would be, even spiders can tie down a lion if we are enough. So we can solve any problem if we work together.
I will say in Italian, two good person better than 3 or 4. So we have a good relationship with Kenya Space Agency. We have a long-term intergovernmental agreement for 15 years. We are implementing together the agreement, and we are happy to continue to advance for this agreement.
I think like we talked about top-down, which is like national policy, and trickle down to like all the technology. I think now I would like to see like more of a bottoms-up approach where like universities collaborating globally and like, having like more and more global internship participation of the Kenyan university students coming in and like, engaging in the industry globally, and that will help like bring in more clarity and like, develop that policy, what is going to be.
Thank you very much to our panelists. A loud of applause to the whole panel. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we are better together. And like he said, sometimes no deal is better than a bad deal, but let's go for good deals. Let's go with knowledge, and let's look for common interests. Thank you very much.
Can we give the panel